Just to give you a couple stats, Clay, just last week, 2 cops were shot in St. Louis. A Milwaukee deputy was shot several times at a traffic stop. 3 cops were shot in Houston. I could go on. Not to mention these 2 guys in New York who were shot and killed. And you can see the blue has had it.
Yeah, look, and Megyn, to your point on police officer shootings, I share this stat and people refuse to believe it. 75% of people shot by police are white, Asian, or Hispanic. 75%. Now, you can argue that black people represent 12% of the overall population are being shot at a higher level, but it's important to recognize that most police officer interactions occur with sort of violent criminal backgrounds, right? It's not as if your average grandma is getting pulled over on a regular basis and hassled, or, and this blows people's mind when they say, hey, you know, these are racially discriminatory actions being undertaken by police. I always fire back with, well, how come you never say they're sexist, right? Men are overwhelmingly shot by police. We don't ever argue, oh, the reason why the police are shooting men is because of sexism. It's because men commit far more in excess violent crime than the 50% of our population would suggest that we would, right? And it's not all men, by the way. It's not mostly grandpas. It's men between the ages of about 16 and 40, right? That's where the overall rate of violence, white, black, Asian, Hispanic, whoever you are, it's both male and it's overwhelmingly regularly young men. And so it's funny when people say, oh, the police are super racist. I said, well, how come you don't argue that they're also super sexist? The police are trying to protect us from the people who are engaging most often in violent crime. This is like a stat that you're not allowed to share, Megyn.
Well, it's a real stat. I mean, 50% of the violent crime in our major cities is committed by people who happen to be black.
Yeah, that's right. And over half of all murders are committed by black men, right? And so if you look at the data, around 6% of the population is black male, and they're committing over half of all murders. By the way, the vast majority, I think it's 93 or 94% of those victims, also black male, because most race crime, right, is not cross race. You tend to, for better or worse, inflict damage upon people of your own race. And you know, look at every Lifetime movie. If you're a woman and you end up being, unfortunately, a victim of violent crime, you know this, Megyn, who is by far the most likely person to do that violent crime to you? Your boyfriend or your husband, right? That's right. Unfortunately, that's why every Lifetime movie, it feels like, that deals with a murder mystery, the husband or the boyfriend is almost always the bad guy, because the one who is most likely statistically going to do harm. It's not some
Except
random.
In my case, if anything were to happen to me, I think you should look into Chelsea Clinton.
Well, I'll flip it. If anything happens, definitely look into my wife first.
All right, let me ask you about some of the absurd reaction to the funeral, to the cops. There's still, even in this moment, you get people who want to double down on the cops. And I'll play you a couple of the reactions. But before I get to that, just to pick up on a point you made yesterday, the people who are now claiming, I never said defund the police. My staff put together just a list of some of these folks who are trying now in the wake of these deaths to say like, oh no, I'm pro cop. What do you mean? I'm just going to tick off a couple for you. Okay. State Attorney General Tish James here in New York, back in April, we've got to talk about the history of policing, which is embedded in racism, going back to the slave trade, the slave code, black code, etc. Right? That's going to help. Sure. That's going to help the cops. Friday night, all of New York State is in mourning tonight. We pray for the safety of our police. All right. Comptroller Brad Lander, June of 2020. It is time to defund the police. Friday night, our hearts are with the police, are with the loved ones and colleagues of this 22-year-old police officer. Council member Shahana Hanif, the Democrat from Brooklyn, January 2020. More police won't keep us safe. Saturday morning, heartbroken by last night's shooting. Assembly member Robert Carroll, D. Brooklyn, June 2020. Our streets have been over-policed and black and brown Americans over-criminalized. Saturday morning, rest in peace, Officer Rivera. Your service will not be forgotten. As New Yorkers, we need to come together as one. Council member Kristen Richardson, Jordan, Democrat, Manhattan, January 2022. NYPD, January 2022. You got it? Earlier this month. NYPD is still the biggest gang in New York City. Friday night, I am saddened. A loss of one is a loss to the whole, as it creates ripples and ripples of pain. I stand with the families of the fallen. Are you kidding? Are you kidding me?
Where's Kamala Harris and Joe Biden on attending some of these funerals for police officers? I mean, just think about it. You know if instead of being a victim here of being killed by a violent perpetrator, if someone had been shot by a police officer, then they would have shown up for those funerals.
Yep.
Right. I mean, how about just I don't know what Kamala does all day anyway. The answer is they don't want to have attention drawn to, as you pointed out, the fact that we're right now dealing with a 20-year high going all the way back to 9/11. 2021 was the first year since 9/11 that we've had this many deaths. The police are under siege. But yes, like that is what should happen. You should be held accountable for awful decisions that are made in terms of demonizing police. It's not a coincidence that demonization has real consequences for police officers all over the country who are now under siege at a level they haven't been in a generation.
Yes, they created this environment, and it has to be dissembled. People need to know the true facts. And you don't like police, no problem. But you can't engage in misinformation about them over and over and then say, oh, I'm so sad about what happened to them. No, your lies help create an environment that makes it more dangerous for these guys to do an already dangerous job. All right, so now the misinformation about cops does have a real effect. And case in point, here's just an example. Here is this moron actress who no one's ever heard of. It's just a story because it reflects the attitudes of so many. Her name is apparently Jacqueline Guzman. She's an actress, and she had thoughts about the difficult traffic situation thanks to this funeral on Friday. Listen to this moron.
Do not need to shut down most of lower Manhattan because one cop died for probably doing his job incorrectly. They kill people who are under 22 every single day for no good reason, and we don't shut down the city for them. So, like, this is fucking ridiculous. This is fucking ridiculous. What if somebody's having a heart attack in this area? Nobody can get to them because it's all blocked off for one fucking cop.
She's been fired. She wasn't really working anyway, from what I can tell. She had some acting company called Face to Face Films, which is apparently no longer associated with her, but nobody's ever heard of her. But her attitude is indicative of a lot of people, especially here in New York.
Yeah, and again, it also what you feel comfortable saying. You know, we talk about in terms of the larger speech codes that are being enforced. She obviously spiraled out of the acceptable level of criticism. But what's interesting, Megyn, is if she had made those comments anti-police and not connected them towards the individual death that she was complaining about in particular, if instead she had been on a video talking about how awful police are and the fact that they kill people all the time and she hates them and everything else, that wouldn't have gotten her, in any way
they
a
put her
great
on
deal.
CNN.